The Insidious Dr Fu Manchu, by Sax Roma. Part 6. Chapter 21. Time wore on, and seemingly brought us no nearer, or very little nearer, to our goal. So carefully had my friend Nayland Smith excluded the matter from the press that, whilst public interest was much engaged with some of the events in the skein of mystery which he had come from Burma to unravel, outside the Secret Service and the Special Department of Scotland Yard, few people recognized that the several murders, robberies, and disappearances formed each a link in a chain. Fewer still were aware that a baneful presence was in our midst, that a past master of the evil arts lay concealed somewhere in the metropolis, searched for by the keenest wits which the authorities could direct to the task, but eluding all triumphant, contemptuous. One link in that chain Smith himself for long failed to recognize, yet it was a big and important link. "Petrie," he said to me one morning, "listen to this. In sight of Shanghai, a clear, dark night. On board the deck of a junk passing close to seaward of the Andaman, a blue flare started up. A minute later, there was a cry of 'Man overboard!' Mr. Lewin, the chief officer who was in charge, stopped the engines. A boat was put out. But no one was recovered. There are sharks in these waters. A fairly heavy sea was running. Inquiry showed the missing man to be a James Edwards, second class, booked to Shanghai. I think the name was assumed. The man was some sort of Oriental, and we had him under close observation." "That's the end of their report," exclaimed Smith. He referred to the two CID men who had joined the Andaman at the moment of her departure from Tilbury. He carefully lighted his pipe. "I guess it a victory for China, Petrie," he said softly. "Until the Great War reveals her secret resources, and I pray that the day be not in my time, we shall never know," I replied. Smith began striding up and down the room. "Whose name," he jerked abruptly, "stands now at the head of our danger list?" He referred to a list which we had compiled of the notable men intervening between the evil genius who secretly had invaded London and the triumph of his cause, the triumph of the yellow races. I glanced at our notes. "Lord Southery," I replied. Smith tossed the morning paper across to me. "Look," he said shortly, "he's dead." I read the account of the peer's death and glanced at the long obituary notice, but no more than glanced at it. He had but recently returned from the East, and now, after a short illness, had died from some affection of the heart. There had been no intimation that his illness was of a serious nature, and even Smith, who watched over his flock, the flock threatened by the wolf, Fu Manchu, with jealous zeal, had not suspected that the end was so near. "Do you think he died a natural death, Smith?" I asked. My friend reached across the table and rested the tip of a long finger upon one of the subheadings to the account. "Sire Frank Narkom. Summoned too late." "You see," said Smith, "Southery died during the night, but Sir Frank Narkom, arriving a few minutes later, unhesitatingly pronounced death to be due to syncope, and seems to have noticed nothing suspicious." I looked at him thoughtfully. "Sir Frank is a great physician," I said slowly, "but we must remember he would be looking for nothing suspicious." "We must remember," rapped Smith, "that if Dr. Fu Manchu is responsible for Southery's death, except to the eye of an expert, there would be nothing suspicious to see. Fu Manchu leaves no clues." "Are you going around?" I asked. Smith shrugged his shoulders. "I think not," he replied. "Either a greater one than Fu Manchu has taken Lord Southery, or the Yellow Doctor has done his work so well that no trace remains of his presence in the matter." Leaving his breakfast untasted, he wandered aimlessly about the room, littering the hearth with matches as he constantly relighted his pipe, which went out every few minutes. "It's no good, Petrie," he burst out suddenly. "It cannot be a coincidence. We must go around and see him." An hour later we stood in the silent room, with its drawn blinds and its deathful atmosphere, looking down at the pale, intellectual face of Henry Stradwick, Lord Southery, the greatest engineer of his day. The mind that lay behind that splendid brow had planned the construction of the railway for which Russia had paid so great a price, had conceived the scheme for the canal which, in the near future, was to bring two great continents, a full week's journey nearer one to the other. But now it would plan no more. He had latterly developed symptoms of angina pectoris, explained the family physician, but I had not anticipated a fatal termination so soon. I was called about 2 o'clock this morning and found Lord Southery in a dangerously exhausted condition. I did all that was possible, and Sir Frank Narcombe was sent for. But shortly before his arrival, the patient expired. I understand, Doctor, that you had been treating Lord Southery for angina pectoris, I said. Yes, was the reply, for some months. You regard the circumstances of his end as entirely consistent with a death from that cause? Certainly. Do you observe anything unusual yourself? Sir Frank Narcombe quite agrees with me. There is surely no room for doubt? No, said Smith, tugging reflectively at the lobe of his left ear. We do not question the accuracy of your diagnosis in any way, sir. The physician seemed puzzled. But am I not right in supposing that you are connected with the police? Asked the physician. Neither Dr. Petrie nor myself are in any way connected with the police, answered Smith. But, nevertheless, I look to you to regard our recent questions as confidential. As we were leaving the house, hushed awesomely in deference to the unseen visitor who had touched Lord Southery with grey, cold fingers, Smith paused, detaining a black-coated man who passed us on the stairs. You were Lord Southery's valet? The man bowed. Were you in the room at the moment of his fatal seizure? I was, sir. Did you see or hear anything unusual, anything unaccountable? Nothing, sir. No strange sounds outside the house, for instance? The man shook his head, and Smith, taking my arm, passed out into the street. Perhaps this business is making me imaginative, he said, but there seems to be something tainting the air in yonder, something peculiar to houses whose doors bear the invisible death mark of Fu Manchu. You are right, Smith, I cried. I hesitated to mention the matter, but I, too, have developed some other sense which warns me of the doctor's presence. Although there is not a scrap of confirmatory evidence, I am as sure that he has brought about Lord Southery's death as if I had seen him strike the blow. It was in that torturing frame of mind, chained, helpless, in our ignorance, or by reason of the Chinaman's supernormal genius, that we lived throughout the ensuing days. My friend began to look like a man consumed by a burning fever. Yet we could not act. In the growing dark of an evening shortly following, I stood idly turning over some of the works exposed for sale outside a second-hand bookseller's in New Oxford Street. One dealing with the secret societies of China struck me as being likely to prove instructive, and I was about to call the shopman when I was startled to feel a hand clutch my arm. I turned around rapidly and was looking into the darkly beautiful eyes of Karamaneh. She, whom I had seen in so many guises, was dressed in a perfectly fitting walking habit, and had much of her wonderful hair concealed beneath a fashionable hat. She glanced about her apprehensively. "Quick, come round the corner." "I must speak to you," she said, her musical voice thrilling with excitement. I never was quite master of myself in her presence. He must have been a man of ice who could have been, I think, for her beauty had all the bouquet of rarity. She was a mystery, and mystery adds charm to a woman. Probably she should have been under arrest, but I know I would have risked much to save her from it. As we turned into a quiet thoroughfare, she stopped and said, "I am in distress. You have often asked me to enable you to capture Dr. Fu Manchu. I am prepared to do so." I could scarcely believe that I heard right. "Your brother," I began. She seized my arm entreatingly, looking into my eyes. "You are a doctor," she said. "I want you to come and see him now." "What? Is he in London?" "He is at the house of Dr. Fu Manchu. And you would have me accompany me there, yes." Nayland Smith, I doubted not, would have counselled me against trusting my life in the hands of this girl with the pleading eyes. Yet I did so, and, with little hesitation, shortly we were travelling eastward in a closed cab. Karamaneh was very silent, but always when I turned to her I found her big eyes fixed upon me with an expression in which there was pleading, in which there was sorrow, in which there was something else, something indefinable, yet strangely disturbing. The cabman she had directed to drive to the lower end of the commercial road, the neighbourhood of the new docks, and the scene of one of our early adventures with Dr. Fu Manchu. The mantle of dusk had closed about the squalid activity of the East End streets as we neared our destination. Aliens of every shade of colour were about us now, emerging from burrow-like alleys into the glare of the lamps upon the main road. In the short space of the drive we had passed from the bright world of the West into the dubious underworld of the East. I do not know that Karamaneh moved. But in sympathy, as we neared the abode of the sinister Chinaman, she crept nearer to me, and when the cab was discharged, and together we walked down a narrow turning leading riverward, she clung to me fearfully, hesitated, and even seemed upon the point of turning back. But, overcoming her fear or repugnance, she led on, through a maze of alleyways and courts, wherein I hopelessly lost my bearings, so that it came home to me how wholly I was in the hands of this girl, whose history was so full of shadows, whose real character was so inscrutable, whose beauty, whose charm truly might mask the cunning of a serpent. I spoke to her. S. She laid her hand upon my arm, enjoining me to silence. The high, drab brick wall of what looked like some part of a dock building loomed above us in the darkness, and the indescribable stenches of the lower Thames were borne to my nostrils through a gloomy, tunnel-like opening, beyond which whispered the river. The muffled clangor of waterside activity was about us. I heard a key grate in a lock, and Karamaneh drew me into the shadow of an open door, entered, and closed it behind her. For the first time I perceived, in contrast to the odours of the court without, the fragrance of the peculiar perfume which now I had come to associate with her. Absolute darkness was about us, and by this perfume alone I knew that she was near to me, until her hand touched mine, and I was led along an uncarpeted passage and up an uncarpeted stair. A second door was unlocked, and I found myself in an exquisitely furnished room, illuminated by the soft light of a shaded lamp which stood upon a low, inlaid table amidst a perfect ocean of silken cushions strewn upon a Persian carpet, whose yellow richness was lost in the shadows beyond the circle of light. Karamaneh raised a curtain draped before a doorway and stood listening intently for a moment. The silence was unbroken. Then something stirred amid the wilderness of cushions, and two tiny bright eyes looked up at me. Peering closely, I succeeded in distinguishing, crouched in that soft luxuriance, a little ape. It was Dr Fu Manchu's marmoset. "This way," whispered Karamaneh. Never, I thought, was a staid medical man committed to a more unwise enterprise. But so far I had gone, and no consideration of prudence could now be of avail. The corridor beyond was thickly carpeted. Following the direction of a faint light which gleamed ahead, it proved to extend as a balcony across one end of a spacious apartment. Together we stood high up there in the shadows, and looked down upon such a scene as I never could have imagined to exist within many a mile of that district. The place below was even more richly appointed than the room into which first we had come. Here, as there, piles of cushions formed splashes of gaudy colour about the floor. 3 lamps hung by chains from the ceiling, their light softened by rich silk shades. One wall was almost entirely occupied by glass cases containing chemical apparatus, tubes, retorts, and other less orthodox indications of Dr Fu Manchu's pursuits, whilst close against another lay the most extraordinary object of a sufficiently extraordinary room, a low couch upon which was extended the motionless form of a boy. In the light of a lamp which hung directly above him, his olive face showed an almost startling resemblance to that of Karamaneh, save that the girl's colouring was more delicate. He had black, curly hair, which stood out prominently against the white covering upon which he lay, his hands crossed upon his breast. Transfixed with astonishment, I stood looking down upon him. The wonders of the Arabian Nights were wonders no longer, for here in East End London was a true magician's palace, lacking not its beautiful slave, lacking not its enchanted prince. "It is Aziz, my brother," said Karamaneh. We passed down a stairway onto the floor of the apartment. Karamaneh knelt and bent over the boy, stroking his hair and whispering to him lovingly. I, too, bent over him, and I shall never forget the anxiety in the girl's eyes as she watched me eagerly whilst I made a brief examination. Brief, indeed, for even ere I had touched him, I knew that the comely shell held no spark of life. But Karamaneh fondled the cold hands, and spoke softly in that Arabic tongue which long before I had divined must be her native language. Then, as I remained silent, she turned and looked at me, read the truth in my eyes, and rose from her knees, stood rigidly upright, and clutched me tremblingly. "He is not dead, he is not dead," she whispered, and shook me as a child might, seeking to arouse me to a proper understanding. "Oh, tell me he is not." "I cannot," I replied gently, "for indeed he is." "No," she said, wild-eyed, and raising her hands to her face as though half distraught. "You do not understand, yet you are a doctor." "You do not understand!" She stopped, moaning to herself, and looking from the handsome face of the boy to me. It was pitiful, it was uncanny, but sorrow for the girl predominated in my mind. Then from somewhere I heard a sound which I had heard before in houses occupied by Dr. Fu Manchu, that of a muffled gong. "Quick!" Karamaneh had me by the arm. "Up! He has returned!" She fled up the stairs to the balcony, I close at her heels. The shadows veiled us. The thick carpet deadened the sound of our tread. Or certainly we must have been detected by the man who entered the room we had just quitted. It was Dr. Fu Manchu. Yellow-robed, immobile, the inhuman green eyes glittering cat-like even, it seemed, before the light struck them, he threaded his way through the archipelago of cushions and bent over the couch of Aziz. Karamaneh dragged me down onto my knees. "Watch," she whispered. "Watch." Dr. Fu Manchu felt for the pulse of the boy, whom a moment since I had pronounced dead, and, stepping to the tall glass case, took out a long-necked flask of chased gold, and from it, into a graduated glass, he poured some drops of an amber liquid wholly unfamiliar to me. I watched him with all my eyes, and noted how high the liquid rose in the measure. He charged a needle syringe, and, bending again over Aziz, made an injection. Then all the wonders I had heard of this man became possible, and, with an awe which any other physician who had examined Aziz must have felt, I admitted him a miracle worker. For as I watched, all but breathless, the dead came to life. The glow of health crept upon the olive cheek. The boy moved. He raised his hands above his head. He sat up, supported by the Chinese doctor. Fu Manchu touched some hidden bell. A hideous yellow man with a scarred face entered, carrying a tray upon which were a bowl containing some steaming fluid, apparently soup, what looked like oaten cakes, and a flask of red wine. As the boy, exhibiting no more unusual symptoms than if he had just awakened from a normal sleep, commenced his repast, Karamaneh drew me gently along the passage into the room which we had first entered. My heart leaped wildly as the marmoset bounded past us to drop hand over hand to the lower apartment in search of its master. "You see," said Karamaneh, her voice quivering, "he is not dead, but without Fu Manchu he is dead to me. How can I leave him when he holds the life of Aziz in his hand?" "You must get me that flask, or some of its contents," I directed. "But tell me, how does he produce the appearance of death?" "I cannot tell you," she replied. "I do not know. It is something in the wine. In another hour Aziz will be again as you saw him. But see," and, opening a little ebony box, she produced a phial half filled with the amber liquid. "Good," I said, and slipped it into my pocket. "When will be the best time to seize Fu Manchu and to restore your brother?" "I will let you know," she whispered, and, opening the door, pushed me hurriedly from the room. "He is going away tonight to the north, but you must not come tonight. Quick, quick," along the passage. "He may call me at any moment." So, with the phial in my pocket containing a potent preparation unknown to Western science, and with a last long look into the eyes of Karamaneh, I passed out into the narrow alley, out from the fragrant perfumes of that mystery house into the place of Thames, side stenches. Chapter 22. "We must arrange for the house to be raided without delay," said Smith. "This time we are sure of our ally." "But we must keep our promise to her," I interrupted. "You can look after that, Petrie," my friend said. "I will devote the whole of my attention to Dr. Fu Manchu," he added grimly. Up and down the room he paced, gripping the blackened briar between his teeth so that the muscles stood out squarely upon his lean jaws. The bronze which spoke of the Burmese sun enhanced the brightness of his grey eyes. "What have I all along maintained?" he jerked, looking back at me across his shoulder. "That, although Karamaneh was one of the strongest weapons in the doctor's armoury, she was one which some day would be turned against him. That day has dawned. We must await word from her." "Quite so." He knocked out his pipe on the grate. "Then, have you any idea of the nature of the fluid in the phial?" "Not the slightest, and I have none to spare for analytical purposes." Leyland Smith began stuffing mixture into the hot pipe bowl and dropping an almost equal quantity on the floor. "I cannot rest, Petrie," he said. "I am itching to get to work. Yet a false move, and he lighted his pipe and stood staring from the window. "I shall, of course, take a needle syringe with me," I explained. Smith made no reply. "If I but knew the composition of the drug which produced the semblance of death," I continued, "my fame would long survive my ashes." My friend did not turn. "But she said it was something he put in the wine," he jerked. "In the wine, yes." Silence fell. My thoughts reverted to Karamaneh, whom Dr. Fu Manchu held in bonds stronger than any slave chains. For, with Aziz, her brother, suspended between life and death, what could she do save obey the mandates of the cunning Chinaman? What perverted genius was his? If that treasury of obscure wisdom which he, perhaps alone of living men, had rifled, could but be thrown open to the sick and suffering, the name of Dr. Fu Manchu would rank with the golden ones in the history of healing. Nayland Smith suddenly turned, and the expression upon his face amazed me. "Look up the next train to L," he rapped. "To L? What?" "There's the Bradshaw. We haven't a minute to waste." In his voice was the imperative note I knew so well. In his eyes was the light which told of an urgent need for action. A portentous truth suddenly grasped. 1 in half an hour, the last. We must catch it. No further word of explanation he vouchsafed, but darted off to dress, for he had spent the afternoon pacing the room in his dressing gown and smoking without intermission. Out and to the corner we hurried, and leaped into the first taxi upon the rank. Smith enjoined the man to hasten, and we were off all in that whirl of feverish activity which characterized my friend's movements in times of important action. He sat glancing impatiently from the window and twitching at the lobe of his ear. "I know you will forgive me, old man," he said, "but there is a little problem which I am trying to work out in my mind. Did you bring the things I mentioned?" "Yes." Conversation lapsed, until, just as the cab turned into the station, Smith said, "Should you consider Lord Southery to have been the first constructive engineer of his time, Petrie?" "Undoubtedly," I replied. "Greater than von Homber of Berlin?" "Possibly not. But von Homber has been dead for 3 years. 3 years, is it? Roughly. Ah!" We reached the station in time to secure a non-corridor compartment to ourselves, and to allow Smith leisure carefully to inspect the occupants of all the others, from the engine to the guard's van. He was muffled up to the eyes, and he warned me to keep out of sight in the corner of the compartment. In fact, his behaviour had me bursting with curiosity. The train having started, "Don't imagine, Petrie," said Smith, "that I am trying to lead you blindfolded in order later to dazzle you with my perspicacity. I am simply afraid that this may be a wild goose chase. The idea upon which I am acting does not seem to have struck you. I wish it had. The fact would argue in favour of its being sound. At present I am hopelessly mystified. Well then, I will not bias you towards my view. But just study the situation, and see if you can arrive at the reason for this sudden journey. I shall be distinctly encouraged if you succeed." But I did not succeed, and since Smith obviously was unwilling to enlighten me, I pressed him no more. The train stopped at Rugby, where he was engaged with the station-master in making some mysterious arrangements. At L, however, their object became plain, for a high-power car was awaiting us, and into this we hurried, and ere the greater number of passengers had reached the platform, were being driven off at headlong speed along the moon-bathed roads. 20 minutes rapid travelling, and a white mansion leaped into the line of sight, standing out vividly against its woody backing. "Stradwick Hall," said Smith, "the home of Lord Southery. We are first." But Dr. Fu Manchu was on the train. Then the truth dawned upon the gloom of my perplexity. Chapter 23. "Your extraordinary proposal fills me with horror, Mr. Smith." The sleek little man in the dress suit, who looked like a head waiter, but was the trusted legal adviser of the House of Southery, puffed at his cigar indignantly. Nayland Smith, whose restless pacing had led him to the far end of the library, turned, a remote but virile figure, and looked back to where I stood by the open hearth with the solicitor. "I am in your hands, Mr. Henderson," he said, and advanced upon the latter, his grey eyes ablaze. "Save for the heir, who is abroad on foreign service, you say there is no kin of Lord Southery to consider. The word rests with you. If I am wrong, and you agree to my proposal, there is none whose susceptibilities will suffer." "My own, sir. If I am right, and you prevent me from acting, you become a murderer, Mr. Henderson. The lawyer started, staring nervously up at Smith, who now towered over him menacingly. Lord Southery was a lonely man, continued my friend. If I could have placed my proposition before one of his blood, I do not doubt what my answer had been. Why do you hesitate? Why do you experience this feeling of horror? Mr. Henderson stared down into the fire. His constitutionally ruddy face was pale. It is entirely irregular, Mr. Smith. We have not the necessary powers. Smith snapped his teeth together impatiently, snatching his watch from his pocket and glancing at it. I am vested with the necessary powers. I will give you a written order, sir. The proceeding savours of paganism. Such a course might be admissible in China, in Burma. Do you weigh a life against such quibbles? Do you suppose that, granting my irresponsibility, Dr. Petrie would countenance such a thing if he doubted the necessity? Mr. Henderson looked at me with pathetic hesitance. There are guests in the house, maulers who attended the ceremony today. They will never know if we are in error, interrupted Smith. Good God! Why do you delay? You wish it to be kept secret? You and I. Mr. Henderson and Dr. Petrie will go now. We require no other witnesses. We are answerable only to our consciences. The lawyer passed his hand across his damp brow. I have never in my life been called upon to come to so momentous a decision in so short a time, he confessed. But, aided by Smith's indomitable will, he made his decision. As its result, we three, looking and feeling like conspirators, hurried across the park beneath a moon whose placidity was a rebuke to the turbulent passions which reared their strangle-growth in the Garden of England. Not a breath of wind stirred amid the leaves. The calm of perfect night soothed everything to slumber. Yet, if Smith were right, and I did not doubt him, the green eyes of Dr. Fu Manchu had looked upon the scene, and I found myself marvelling that its beauty had not wilted up. Even now the dread Chinaman must be near to us. As Mr. Henderson unlocked the ancient iron gates, he turned to Nayland Smith. His face twitched oddly. "Witness that I do this unwillingly," he said, "most unwillingly." "Mine be the responsibility," was the reply. Smith's voice quivered, responsive to the nervous vitality pent up within that lean frame. He stood motionless, listening, and I knew for whom he listened. He peered about him to right and left, and I knew whom he expected, but dreaded to see. Above us now the trees looked down with a solemnity different from the aspect of the monarchs of the park, and the nearer we came to our journey's end, the more sombre and lowering bent the verdant arch, or so it seemed. By that path, patched now with pools of moonlight, Lord Southery had passed upon his bier, with the sun to light his going. By that path, several generations of Stradwicks had gone to their last resting-place. To the doors of the vault, the moon-rays found free access. No branch, no leaf intervened. Mr. Henderson's face looked ghastly. The keys which he carried rattled in his hand. "Light the lantern," he said unsteadily. Nayland Smith, who again had been peering suspiciously about into the shadows, struck a match and lighted the lantern which he carried. He turned to the solicitor. "Be calm, Mr. Henderson," he said sternly. "It is your plain duty to your client." "God be my witness that I doubt it," replied Henderson, and opened the door. We descended the steps. The air beneath was damp and chill. It touched us as with clammy fingers, and the sensation was not wholly physical. Before the narrow mansion which now sufficed Lord Southery, the great engineer whom kings had honoured, Henderson reeled and clutched at me for support. Smith and I had looked to him for no aid in our uncanny task, and, rightly. With averted eyes he stood over by the steps of the tomb, whilst my friend and myself set to work. In the pursuit of my profession, I had undertaken labours as unpleasant, but never amid an environment such as this. It seemed that generations of Stradwicks listened to each turn of every screw. At last it was done, and the pallid face of Lord Southery questioned the intruding light. Nayland Smith's hand was as steady as a rigid bar when he raised the lantern. Later, I knew, there would be a sudden releasing of the tension of will reaction, physical and mental, but not until his work was finished. That my own hand was steady I ascribed to one thing solely, professional zeal. For, under conditions which, in the event of failure and exposure, must have led to an unpleasant inquiry by the British Medical Association, I was about to attempt an experiment never before essayed by a physician of the white races. Though I failed, though I succeeded, that it ever came before. The BMA or any other council was improbable, in the former event all but impossible. But the knowledge that I was about to practice charlatanry, or what any one of my fellow practitioners must have designated as such, was with me. Yet so profound had my belief become in the extraordinary being whose existence was a danger to the world that I revelled in my immunity from official censure. I was glad that it had fallen to my lot to take at least one step, though blindly, into the future of medical science. So far as my skill bore me, Lord Southery was dead. Unhesitatingly, I would have given a death certificate, save for two considerations. The first, although his latest scheme ran contrary from the interests of Dr. Fu Manchu, his genius, diverted into other channels, would serve the yellow group better than his death. The second, I had seen the boy Aziz raised from a state as like death as this. From the phial of amber-hued liquid which I had with me, I charged the needle syringe. I made the injection and waited. "If he is really dead," whispered Smith. "It seems incredible that he can have survived for 3 days without food. Yet I have known a fakir to go for a week." Mr. Henderson groaned. Watch in hand, I stood observing the grey face. A second passed, another, a third. In the fourth, the miracle began. Over the seemingly cold clay crept the hue of pulsing life. It came in waves which corresponded with the throbbing of the awakened heart, which swept fuller and stronger, which filled and quickened the chilled body. As we rapidly freed the living man from the trappings of the dead one, Southery, uttering a stifled scream, sat up, looked about him with half-glazed eyes, and fell back. "My God!" cried Smith. "It is all right," I said, and had time to note how my voice had assumed a professional tone. "A little brandy from my flask is all that is necessary now." "You have 2 patients, Doctor," rapped my friend. Mr. Henderson had fallen in a swoon to the floor of the vault. "Quiet," whispered Smith. "Each ears here." He extinguished the light. I supported Lord Southery. "What has happened?" he kept moaning. "Where am I? Oh, God, what has happened?" I strove to reassure him in a whisper and placed my travelling coat about him. The door at the top of the mausoleum steps we had reclosed, but not relocked. Now, as I upheld the man whom literally we had rescued from the grave, I heard the door reopen. To aid Henderson, I could make no move. Smith was breathing hard beside me. I dared not think what was about to happen, nor what its effects might be upon Lord Southery in his exhausted condition. Through the Memphian dark of the tomb cut a spear of light, touching the last stone of the stairway. A guttural voice spoke some words rapidly, and I knew that Dr. Fu Manchu stood at the head of the stairs. Although I could not see my friend, I became aware that Nayland Smith had his revolver in his hand, and I reached into my pocket for mine. At last the cunning Chinaman was about to fall into a trap. It would require all his genius, I thought, to save him tonight. Unless his suspicions were aroused by the unlocked door, his capture was imminent. Someone was descending the steps. In my right hand I held my revolver, and, with my left arm about Lord Southery, I waited through 10 such seconds of suspense as I have rarely known. The spear of light plunged into the well of darkness again. Lord Southery, Smith and myself were hidden by the angle of the wall, but full upon the purplish face of Mr. Henderson, the beam shone. In some way it penetrated to the murk in his mind, and he awakened from his swoon with a hoarse cry, struggled to his feet, and stood looking up the stair in a sort of frozen horror. Smith was past him at a bound. Something flashed towards him as the light was extinguished. I saw him duck, and heard the knife ring upon the floor. I managed to move sufficiently to see at the top, as I fired up the stairs, the yellow face of Dr. Fu Manchu, to see the gleaming, chatoyant eyes, greenly terrible as they sought to pierce the gloom. A flying figure was racing up, 3 steps at a time, that of a brown man scantily clad. He stumbled and fell, by which I knew that he was hit, but went on again, Smith hard on his heels. "Mr. Henderson," I cried, "relight the lantern and take charge of Lord Southery. Here is my flask on the floor. I rely upon you. Smith's revolver spoke again as I went bounding up the stair. Black against the square of moonlight, I saw him stagger, I saw him fall. As he fell, for the third time, I heard the crack of his revolver. Instantly I was at his side. Somewhere along the black aisle beneath the trees, receding footsteps pattered. "Are you hurt, Smith?" I cried anxiously. He got upon his feet. "He has a dacoit with him," he replied, and showed me the long, curved knife which he held in his hand, a full inch of the blade blood-stained. "A near thing for me, Petrie." I heard the whir of a restarted motor. "We have lost him," said Smith. "But we have saved Lord Southery," I said. "Fu Manchu will credit us with a skill as great as his own." "We must get to the car," Smith muttered, "and try to overtake them." "Oh, my left arm is useless." "It would be mere waste of time to attempt to overtake them," I argued, "for we have no idea in which direction they will proceed." "I have a very good idea," snapped Smith. "Stradwick Hall is less than 10 miles from the coast. There is only one practicable means of conveying an unconscious man secretly from here to London." "You think he meant to take him from here to London? Prior to shipping him to China, I think so. His clearinghouse is probably on the Thames. A boat, a yacht presumably, is lying off the coast in readiness. Fu Manchu may even have designed to ship him direct to China. Lord Southery, a bizarre figure, my travelling coat wrapped about him and supported by his solicitor, who was almost as pale as himself, emerged from the vault into the moonlight. "This is a triumph for you, Smith," I said. The throb of Fu Manchu's car died into faintness and was lost in the night silence. "Only half a triumph," he replied. "But we still have another chance. The raid on his house." "When will the word come from Karamaneh?" Southery spoke in a weak voice. "Gentlemen," he said, "it seems I am raised from the dead. It was the weirdest moment of the night wherein we heard that newly buried man speak from the mould of his tomb." "Yes," replied Smith slowly, "and spared from the fate of heaven alone knows how many men of genius. The Yellow Society lacks a Southery, but that Dr Fu Manchu was in Germany 3 years ago I have reason to believe, so that, even without visiting the grave of your great Teutonic rival, who suddenly died at about that time, I venture to predict that they have a von Homber. And the futurist group in China knows how to make men work." Chapter 24. From the rescue of Lord Southery, my story bears me mercilessly on to other things. I may not tarry, as more leisurely penmen, to round my incidents. They were not of my choosing. I may not pause to make you better acquainted with the figure of my drama. Its scheme is none of mine. Often enough, in those days, I found a fitness in the lines of Omar. We are no other than a moving show of magic shadow, shapes that come and go round with the sun, illumined lantern held in midnight by the master of the show. But the master of the show, in this case, was Dr Fu Manchu. I have been asked many times since the days with which these records deal, who was Dr Fu Manchu. Let me confess here that my final answer must be postponed. I can only indicate, at this place, the trend of my reasoning, and leave my reader to form whatever conclusion he pleases. What group can we isolate and label as responsible for the overthrow of the Manchus? The casual student of modern Chinese history will reply, Young China. This is unsatisfactory. What do we mean by Young China? In my own hearing, Fu Manchu had disclaimed, with scorn, association with the whole of that movement, and assuming that the name were not an assumed one, he clearly can have been no anti-Manchu, no Republican. The Chinese Republican is of the Mandarin class, but of a new generation which veneers its Confucianism with Western polish. These youthful and unbalanced reformers, in conjunction with older but no less ill-balanced provincial politicians, may be said to represent Young China. Amid such turmoils as this, we invariably look for and invariably find a third party. In my opinion, Dr Fu Manchu was one of the leaders of such a party. Another question often put to me was, where did the doctor hide during the time that he pursued his operations in London? This is more susceptible of explanation. For a time, Nayland Smith supposed, as I did myself, that the opium den adjacent to the old Ratcliffe Highway was the Chinaman's base of operations. Later we came to believe that the mansion near Windsor was his hiding place, and later still, the hulk lying off the downstream flats. But I think I can state with confidence that the spot which he had chosen for his home was neither of these, but the East End riverside building which I was the first to enter. Of this I am all but sure, for the reason that it not only was the home of Fu Manchu, of Karamaneh, and of her brother Aziz, but the home of something else, of something which I shall speak of later. The dreadful tragedy, or series of tragedies which attended the raid upon the place, will always mark in my memory the supreme horror of a horrible case. Let me endeavour to explain what occurred. By the aid of Karamaneh, you have seen how we had located the whilom warehouse, which, from the exterior, was so drab and dreary, but which within was a place of wondrous luxury. At the moment selected by our beautiful accomplice, Inspector Weymouth and a body of detectives entirely surrounded it. A river police launch lay off the wharf which opened from it on the riverside, and this upon a singularly black night, than which a better could not have been chosen. "You will fulfil your promise to me," said Karamaneh, and looked up into my face. She was enveloped in a big, loose cloak, and from the shadow of the hood her wonderful eyes gleamed out like stars. "What do you wish us to do?" asked Nayland Smith. "You and Dr. Petrie," she replied swiftly, "must enter first and bring out Aziz. Until he is safe, until he is out of that place, you are to make no attempt upon—" "Upon Dr. Fu Manchu?" interrupted Weymouth, for Karamaneh hesitated to pronounce the dreaded name, as she always did. "But how can we be sure that there is no trap laid for us?" The Scotland Yard man did not entirely share my confidence in the integrity of this Eastern girl whom he knew to have been a creature of the Chinaman's. "Aziz lies in the private room," she explained eagerly, her old accent more noticeable than usual. "There is only one of the Burmese men in the house, and he dare not enter without orders. But Fu Manchu? We have nothing to fear from him. He will be your prisoner within 10 minutes from now. I have no time for words, you must believe—" She stamped her foot impatiently. "And the dacoit," snapped Smith. "He also." "I think perhaps I'd better come in too," said Weymouth slowly. Karamaneh shrugged her shoulders with quick impatience, and unlocked the door in the high brick wall which divided the gloomy, evil-smelling court from the luxurious apartments of Dr. Fu Manchu. "Make no noise," she warned, and Smith and myself followed her along the uncarpeted passage beyond. Inspector Weymouth, with a final word of instruction to his second-in-command, brought up the rear. The door was reclosed. A few paces farther, on a second, was unlocked. Passing through a small room, unfurnished, a farther passage led us to a balcony. The transition was startling. Darkness was about us now, and silence, a perfumed, slumberous darkness. A silence full of mystery. For, beyond the walls of the apartment whereon we looked down, waged the unceasing battle of sounds that is the hymn of the great industrial river. About the scented confines which bounded us now floated the smoke-laden vapours of the lower Thames. From the metallic but infinitely human clangor of dockside life, from the unpleasant but homely odours which prevail where ships swallow in and belch out the concrete evidences of commercial prosperity, we had come into this incensed stillness, where one shaded lamp painted dim enlargements of its Chinese silk upon the nearer walls, and left the greater part of the room the darker for its contrast. Nothing of the Thames side activity, of the riveting and scraping. The bumping of bales, the bawling of orders, the hiss of steam penetrated to this perfumed place. In the pool of tinted light lay the death-like figure of a dark-haired boy, Karamaneh's muffled form bending over him. "At last I stand in the house of Dr. Fu Manchu," whispered Smith. Despite the girl's assurance, we knew that proximity to the sinister Chinaman must be fraught with danger. We stood, not in the lion's den, but in the serpent's lair. From the time when Nayland Smith had come from Burma in pursuit of this advance guard of a cogent yellow peril, the face of Dr. Fu Manchu rarely had been absent from my dreams day or night. The millions might sleep in peace, the millions in whose cause we laboured. But we who knew the reality of the danger knew that a veritable octopus had fastened upon England. A yellow octopus whose head was that of Dr. Fu Manchu, whose tentacles were dacoity, thuggy, modes of death, secret and swift, which in the darkness plucked men from life and left no clue behind. "Karamaneh," I called softly. The muffled form beneath the lamp turned so that the soft light fell upon the lovely face of the slave girl. She who had been a pliant instrument in the hands of Fu Manchu now was to be the means whereby society should be rid of him. She raised her finger warningly, then beckoned me to approach. My feet sinking in the rich pile of the carpet, I came through the gloom of the great apartment into the patch of light, and, Karamaneh beside me, stood looking down upon the boy. It was Aziz, her brother, dead so far as Western law had power to judge, but kept alive in that death-like trance by the uncanny power of the Chinese doctor. "Be quick," she said, "be quick. Awaken him, I'm afraid." From the case which I carried, I took out a needle syringe and a phial containing a small quantity of amber-hued liquid. It was a drug not to be found in the British pharmacopoeia. Of its constitution I knew nothing. Although I had had the phial in my possession for some days, I had not dared to devote any of its precious contents to analytical purposes. The amber drops spelled life for the boy Aziz, spelled success for the mission of Nayland Smith, spelled ruin for the fiendish Chinaman. I raised the white coverlet. The boy, fully dressed, lay with his arms crossed upon his breast. I discerned the mark of previous injections as, charging the syringe from the phial, I made what I hoped would be the last of such experiments upon him. I would have given half of my small worldly possessions to have known the real nature of the drug which was now coursing through the veins of Aziz, which was tinting the greyed face with the olive tone of life, which, so far as my medical training bore me, was restoring the dead to life. But such was not the purpose of my visit. I was come to remove from the house of Dr. Fu Manchu the living chain which bound Karamaneh to him. The boy alive and free, the doctor's hold upon the slave girl would be broken. My lovely companion, her hands convulsively clasped, knelt and devoured with her eyes the face of the boy who was passing through the most amazing physiological change in the history of therapeutics. The peculiar perfume which she wore, which seemed to be a part of her, which always I associated with her, was faintly perceptible. Karamaneh was breathing rapidly. "You have nothing to fear," I whispered. "See, he is reviving. In a few moments all will be well with him." The hanging lamp, with its garishly coloured shade, swung gently above us, wafted, it seemed, by some draught which passed through the apartment. The boy's heavy lids began to quiver, and Karamaneh nervously clutched my arm, and held me so whilst we watched for the long-lashed eyes to open. The stillness of the place was positively unnatural. It seemed inconceivable that all about us was the discordant activity of the commercial East End. Indeed, this eerie silence was becoming oppressive. It began positively to appall me. Inspector Weymouth's wondering face peeped over my shoulder. "Where is Dr. Fu Manchu?" I whispered, as Nayland Smith in turn appeared beside me. "I cannot understand the silence of the house." "Look about," replied Karamaneh, never taking her eyes from the face of Aziz. I peered around the shadowy walls. Tall glass cases there were, shelves and niches, where once, from the gallery above, I had seen the tubes and retorts, the jars of unfamiliar organisms, the books of unfamiliar lore, the impedimenta of the occult student and man of science. The visible evidences of Fu Manchu's presence. Shelves, cases, niches were bare. Of the complicated appliances unknown to civilized laboratories wherewith he pursued his strange experiments, of the tubes wherein he isolated the bacilli of unclassified diseases, of the yellow-bound volumes for a glimpse at which, had they known of their contents, the great men of Harley Street would have given a fortune. No trace remained. The silken cushions, the inlaid tables, all were gone. The room was stripped, dismantled. Had Fu Manchu fled, the silence assumed a new significance. His dacoits and kindred ministers of death all must have fled too. "You have let him escape us," I said rapidly. "You promised to aid us to capture him, to send us a message, and you have delayed until—" "No," she said, "no," and clutched at my arm again. "Oh, is he not reviving slowly? Are you sure you have made no mistake?" Her thoughts were all for the boy, and her solicitude touched me. I again examined Aziz, the most remarkable patient of my busy professional career. As I counted the strengthening pulse, he opened his dark eyes, which were so like the eyes of Karamaneh, and, with the girl's eager arms tightly about him, sat up, looking wonderingly around. Karamaneh pressed her cheek to his, whispering loving words in that softly spoken Arabic which had first betrayed her nationality to Nayland Smith. I handed her my flask, which I had filled with wine. "My promise is fulfilled," I said. "You are free, now for Fu Manchu. But first let us admit the police to this house. There is something uncanny in its stillness." "No," she replied. "First let my brother be taken out and placed in safety. Will you carry him?" She raised her face to that of Inspector Weymouth, upon which was written awe and wonder. The burly detective lifted the boy as tenderly as a woman, passed through the shadows to the stairway, ascended, and was swallowed up in the gloom. Nayland Smith's eyes gleamed feverishly. He turned to Karamaneh. "You are not playing with us," he said harshly. "We have done our part. It remains for you to do yours." "Do not speak so loudly," the girl begged. "Ichi is near us, and, oh God, I fear him so." "Where is he?" persisted my friend. Karamaneh's eyes were glassy with fear now. "You must not touch him until the police are here," she said. But from the direction of her quick, agitated glances, I knew that, her brother safe now, she feared for me, and for me alone. Those glances sent my blood dancing, for Karamaneh was an Eastern jewel which any man of flesh and blood must have coveted, had he known it to lie within his reach. Her eyes were twin lakes of mystery which, more than once, I had known the desire to explore. "Look beyond that curtain," her voice was barely audible, "but do not enter. Even as he is, I fear him." Her voice, her palpable agitation, prepared us for something extraordinary. Tragedy and Fu Manchu were never far apart. Though we were two, and help was so near, we were in the abode of the most cunning murderer who ever came out of the East. It was with strangely mingled emotions that I crossed the thick carpet, Nayland Smith beside me, and drew aside the draperies concealing a door to which Karamaneh had pointed. Then, upon looking into the dim place beyond, all else save what it held was forgotten. We looked upon a small, square room, the walls draped with fantastic Chinese tapestry, the floor strewn with cushions, and reclining in a corner, where the faint blue light from a lamp, placed upon a low table, painted grotesque shadows about the cavernous face, was Dr. Fu Manchu. At sight of him, my heart leaped, and seemed to suspend its functions, so intense was the horror which this man's presence inspired in me. My hand clutching the curtain, I stood watching him. The lids veiled the malignant green eyes, but the thin lips seemed to smile. Then Smith silently pointed to the hand which held a little pipe. A sickly perfume assailed my nostrils, and the explanation of the hushed silence and the ease with which we had thus far executed our plan came to me. The cunning mind was torpid lost in a brutish world of dreams. Fu Manchu was in an opium sleep. The dim light traced out a network of tiny lines which covered the yellow face from the pointed chin to the top of the great domed brow and formed deep shadow pools in the hollows beneath his eyes. At last we had triumphed. I could not determine the depth of his obscene trance, and mastering some of my repugnance, and forgetful of Karamaneh's warning, I was about to step forward into the room, loaded with its nauseating opium fumes, when a soft breath fanned my cheek. "Do not go in," came Karamaneh's warning voice, hushed, trembling. Her little hand grasped my arm. She drew Smith and myself back from the door. "There is danger there," she whispered. "Do not enter that room. The police must reach him in some way and drag him out. Do not enter that room." The girl's voice quivered hysterically. Her eyes blazed into savage flame. The fierce resentment born of dreadful wrongs was consuming her now, but fear of Fu Manchu held her yet. Inspector Weymouth came down the stairs and joined us. "I have sent the boy to Ryman's room at the station," he said. "The divisional surgeon will look after him until you arrive, Dr. Petrie. All is ready now. The launch is just off the wharf, and every side of the place under observation. Where's our man?" He drew a pair of handcuffs from his pocket and raised his eyebrows interrogatively. The absence of sound of any demonstration from the uncanny Chinaman whom he was there to arrest puzzled him. Nayland Smith jerked his thumb toward the curtain. At that, and before we could utter a word, Weymouth stepped to the draped door. He was a man who drove straight at his goal and saved reflections for subsequent leisure. I think, moreover, that the atmosphere of the place, stripped as it was, it retained its heavy, voluptuous perfume, had begun to get a hold upon him. He was anxious to shake it off, to be up and doing. He pulled the curtain aside and stepped into the room. Smith and I perforce followed him. Just within the door, the three of us stood looking across at the limp thing which had spread terror throughout the eastern and western world. Helpless as Fu Manchu was, he inspired terror now, though the giant intellect was inert, stupefied. In the dimly lit apartment we had quitted, I heard Karamaneh utter a stifled scream. But it came too late. As though cast up by a volcano, the silken cushions, the inlaid table with its blue-shaded lamp, the garish walls, the sprawling figure with the ghastly light playing upon its features, quivered and shot upward. So it seemed to me, though, in the ensuing instant I remembered, too late, a previous experience of the floors of Fu Manchu's private apartments. I knew what had indeed befallen us. A trap had been released beneath our feet. I recall falling, but have no recollection of the end of my fall, of the shock marking the drop. I only remember fighting for my life against a stifling something which had me by the throat. I knew that I was being suffocated, but my hands met only the deathly emptiness. Into a poisonous well of darkness I sank. I could not cry out. I was helpless. Of the fate of my companions I knew nothing, could surmise nothing. Then all consciousness ended,